Hello, and welcome to our webinar, Fossil Fuels Next Move, the Rush for Hydrogen and Carbon Capture and Storage in Indiana. My name is Susan Thomas, and I'm the Director of Legislation and Policy for Just Transition Northwest Indiana, a regional environmental justice organization promoting the transition from fossil fuels to a safe, healthy, and regenerative economy and environment for workers and communities here in Northwest Indiana. Please keep in mind, this webinar covers a huge topic. Much of it is technical, and that we try to make it understandable to everyone in the time frame allowed. So it's extremely condensed, but hopefully we hit what we think are some of the most important points for you to take away from this evening's presentation. We are so pleased and grateful to be presenting this with the Citizens Action Coalition, or CAC, and members of Gary Advocates for Responsible Development, or GARD. In the interest of time, we'll have them introduce themselves before they present. Please note, the chat is disabled, but Q&A is live, and we will respond at the end. If you need closed captions, click on the link for that bar that you see circled in the bottom right-hand corner, and it should begin. And with that, let's start our presentation. We're starting with a quick and condensed overview. The bipartisan infrastructure law is awarding $7 billion for 7 hydrogen hubs across the US to reach net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. The Midwest Mach H2 hub includes 70 public and private industries, businesses, and universities. There's been little to no transparency and public engagement in a process shrouded by privacy and non-disclosure agreements. So what is a hydrogen hub? Here's what the Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations presented with the Department of Energy. It looks like a children's book illustration. So happy and green. Hubs are networks for hydrogen producers, consumers, and infrastructure to support that on a large scale, though operations of this size have not been done before. Hydrogen is produced by steam reforming of methane in natural gas, which is gray hydrogen. This has high CO2 emissions. If the CO2 is removed and stored, called blue hydrogen, it's touted as a fuel and energy carrier that is a clean solution to burning fossil fuels. This is a myth due to an increased use of natural gas or other sources to power the carbon capture itself. Colors designate the various forms of energy used to create hydrogen. Here's the combo of what's going into the Mach H2, though most of it will be blue and gray. Each involves a complex set of technologies and drawbacks that need addressing. Don't infer one is better or less harmful because of the color. This should not be presented as an artist's palette or a bag of Skittles. While carbon dioxide emissions are lower for blue hydrogen than gray, fugitive methane leaks in blue hydrogen's carbon capture storage process are higher than gray, making the greenhouse gas footprint for hydrogen for blue hydrogen 20% greater than burning natural gas. You can read more about that in the links we've provided at the end. So what is it? What is carbon capture storage, or CCS? Carbon dioxide from power generation or industry is captured, transported, and stored underground. What could go wrong? This process alone is energy use intensive, and methane can leak as it passes through reformers, pipelines, and ships. There are many opportunities for such fugitive leaks, which only intensify global warming. Please see our link to the poisoning of the entire town of Satarsha, Mississippi. Emergency vehicles were disabled, and residents now suffer lifelong health impacts because a pipeline burst there. Pipelines transport highly compressed, pressurized liquid moving at rapid speed. It's not a lazy river of maple syrup. One hole in the wrong spot can rapidly unzip a line and explode it from valve to valve. Scientific, technical, and academic research groups are weighing in on the inaccuracies of the DOE plan. Among them, the Union of Concerned Scientists, the Institute for Energy Economics and Financial Analysis, the Institute for Energy and Environmental Research, Cornell and Stanford universities, the Natural Resources Defense Council, and on and on. We've also shared some of those in our links. So here are a couple of myths to dispel. Please note, so we've covered this. Not all CO2 can be captured, and the methane leaks are more powerful than actually what the CO2 itself is. There is no perfected method of detecting any of the fugitive methane leaks that are associated with this. So no industry is operating yet on the scale that is proposed. They are capturing less than 50% of what is needed for the climate goals. And I'm going to add one more in here. The proposal of blending hydrogen with natural gas to save energy is not a good idea. It causes pipeline embrittlement and only dilutes the gas, so you actually end up having to burn more gas, sometimes up to 30% more. So these are a few of the myths that we've dispelled, and yes, there are many more. In short, the money spent on blue hydrogen production will lead to continued greenhouse gas emissions for decades, wasting time and taxpayer money that could be used to fund real solutions. This gives fossil fuel companies a green light to build infrastructure that depends on their continued operation. I now turn it over to Kerwin Olson, Executive Director of Citizens Action Coalition.
Yeah. Hey, everybody. Kerwin here with Citizens Action Coalition, here to provide a brief background on legislation, both at the federal level and the state level, that has led us to where we are today. Yeah, I started out with the 45Q tax credit, as that's really the elephant in the room, if you will. And my colleague and friend Ben will dive deeper into the details related to the 45Q tax credit, but wanted to share that CCS at the federal level really first became meaningful in the 2005 Energy Policy Act, when that bill created the regional CCS partnerships that we still see operating today throughout the country, funded R&D projects related to carbon capture and storage, and even helped fund the now defunct CCTR, or the Center for Coal Technology Research, that was housed at Purdue University for a number of years. Then in 2008, with the Energy Improvement and Extension Act, that is the act that created the Section 45Q tax credit at that time, $20 per ton, with the 45Q tax credit being the incentive per ton for the sequestration or storage of supercritical CO2 underground and geological formations. Nobody really acted on that $20 per ton because of sheer economics. The stuff's really, really expensive, and private capital, public utilities simply don't want to risk their own money. So in the 2008 Bipartisan Budget Act, that really took it a step further. That strongly encouraged the construction and use of carbon capture and sequestration, increased the Section 45Q tax credit to $50 per ton. And one of the things we'll be talking about tonight is, of course, I have on there motivated WVR. That is the Wabash Valley Resources Project that folks have probably been reading about a lot. That's a facility in West Terre Haute that at least has plans anyway to inject supercritical CO2 in both Vigo and Vermilion County. But it was that 2018 Bipartisan Budget Act that created what Wabash Valley at the time believed was favorable economics for their facility. So they proceeded forward with their legislative agenda to help enable their project. And then just last year in the well-renowned Inflation Reduction Act in 2022, or IRA, that has many, many good things in it, but it's got some bad in it. And one of the things it has in it is as I like to call it, the supersizing, if you will, of the Section 45Q tax credit, all the way up to $85 per ton of CO2 stored. Also allowed direct pay and allow the holders of that tax credit to monetize that tax credit for cash. And again, my colleague Ben will be going into a little more of the details around the 45Q tax credit, but that's really what is driving all of the CCS activity across the country and in Indiana today. Then we've had 5 really meaningful pieces of legislation at the state level that have addressed CCS or CO2 pipelines in some way. Folks may be unaware that back in 2011, with the notorious controversial Senate Enrolled Act 251, otherwise known more widely as the federal mandate statute, but that's when the state of Indiana first granted eminent domain for CO2 pipelines to private operators of proposed CO2 pipelines. So eminent domain for CO2 pipelines in Indiana has been around since 2011. Then it was fairly quiet for a number of years on the CCS front in Indiana until Wabash Valley Resources reared their head at the State House in 2019 with their bill, Senate Enrolled Act 442. That bill created the Wabash Valley Resource Pilot Project, which was established in that bill. Then 2022 was quite the session. That's when House Enrolled Act 1209, otherwise known as really the BP bill. It was BP that was driving that bill, but that was the bill that created the statewide framework, both for CO2 pipelines and the construction, operation, and maintenance of those pipelines throughout the state, as well as that's when we created sequestration wells or where the CO2 was going to be stored on site. And not surprisingly, the Wabash Valley Resource folks got themselves exempted from that legislation. So I think everybody needs to understand that everybody but Wabash Valley Resources has a different set of rules. Wabash Valley Resources has their own set of rules. They exempted themselves from the statewide bill, HEA 1209 in 2022, worked hard for a number of years, and finally got their provisions passed with Senate Enrolled Act 451 in 2023, which we like to call the WVR special legislation that is specific only to the Wabash Valley Resources Project and only to Vigo and Vermilion County, Indiana. That gave Wabash Valley Resources special exemptions related to notifying customers, condemning property, and went a step further on some immunity protection for the company. Then we also had in 2023 HEA 1626, which may seem like a fairly innocuous bill, but they passed 1209 in 2022 without granting DNR the ability to write rules. So in 2023, they passed House Enrolled Act 1626, which authorized DNR to write rules related to the operation, construction, and maintenance of CO2 pipelines in Indiana, as well as all of the rules and regulations related to CO2 storage wells. And it's not a very big secret that DNR currently has an industry-only, invite-only working group currently writing those rules that is not open to the public. And we have been talking to folks and trying to get that process opened up to the public, which we hope will happen sometime soon. And I think it's important to point out something that came from both Senate Bill 251 in 2011, as well as Senate Bill 442 in 2019. And that is, we declared in the state of Indiana that it was in the public interest, as a matter of legislative determination, that CO2 pipelines and the underground storage of CO2 is declared to be in the public interest of the state of Indiana, which really is quite ironic in the state of Indiana when we barely acknowledge the existence of climate change and the impact of CO2 emissions and methane emissions to our world. But yet we do declare that CCS is in the public interest here in the state of Indiana. And then I'll wrap up here before turning it over to Ben with just a few points to make about differentiating a few things between 1209 and 2022 and the special set of rules that Wabash Valley Resources got with their bill in 2019 as well as in 2023. It should be understood first and foremost that all operators are playing by the same rules related to CO2 pipelines. They all have eminent domain for CO2 pipelines, including private operators. So there's no difference between the rules that Wabash Valley Resources and everybody else are playing with when it comes to CO2 pipelines. Eminent domain for CO2 pipelines exists, including for private operators. This eminent domain relates to the storage wells or the dumps, as my friends out in Vigo and Vermilion County like to call those. But House Enrolled Act 1209, in order to get a permit from DNR for the injection of CO2, it requires 70% consent from all affected landowners on property. That's based on acreage, not parcels. 70% consent. And after that, the Department of Natural Resources, or DNR, can issue a certificate for the injection. Wabash Valley Resources has a different set of rules that sort of conflict a little bit. Senate Enrolled Act 442 required 60% consent of landowners, which is consistent with the natural gas statutes, and then they can exercise eminent domain. However, Senate Enrolled Act 451 in 2023 effectively authorized Wabash Valley Resources to, as we say, condemn without notification, meaning that Wabash Valley Resources can begin injecting, and they're only required to notify customers upon the expected migration of the CO2 plume underground, meaning when they anticipate that that CO2 plume will enter your property, then they have to give you notification, but they don't necessarily have to give you notification prior to injecting. And then another critical component of CCS relates to the long-term ownership or the long-term stewardship of the CO2 that is sequestered or stored underground. And folks should know that House Enrolled Act 1209, again, which sets the rules of the road for the entire state, with the exception of Wabash Valley Resources, basically says that the state, meaning taxpayers of the state of Indiana, shall assume the ownership of the underground CO2 after the operator has closed operations of that facility, which includes the regulatory responsibility related to any requirements that may be around the reporting, monitoring of that facility. Also, the long-term liability of that CO2 no longer falls on the shoulders of the folks that put it there, but rather is assumed by the taxpayers of the state of Indiana. Wabash Valley Resources, however, in their bill, the state may assume ownership of the CO2 after 12 years or less of injecting CO2, but is silent after 12 years. So Wabash Valley Resources doesn't quite have the same deal with respect to long-term ownership of the CO2 as everybody else, the state, meaning taxpayers, will assume ownership and stewardship of the underground CO2. But Wabash Valley Resources, that's not necessarily the case.
Thank you, Kerwin. My name is Ben Inskeep. I'm Program Director at Citizens Action Coalition, and appreciate the great overview Kerwin gave us of the policy landscape, both at the state and federal level. Unfortunately, those policy changes, from the subsidies to the eminent domain to the state taking on the liability of CO2 stored underground, is having its intended effect. In Indiana, we're seeing a massive increase in the number of companies that are interested in carbon capture and sequestration. As you can see from this map here, there are now at least 10 different projects under development or being considered by companies throughout Indiana. And these span all sorts of industries, everything from traditional power generation at coal-fired power plants, to cement and steel manufacturing, to ethanol and hydrogen, to the Wabash Valley Resources project that Kerwin mentioned, which is making hydrogen and potentially ammonia. So it really does span a gamut of many different types of industries that are now interested in carbon capture and sequestration, despite it being very expensive and unproven technology, thanks to these very lucrative incentives that have been set up. It's important to note, though, that the scale of carbon capture and sequestration for these projects does vary considerably. While many of these facilities are planning on storing several million tons of CO2 per year, the BP project in Northwest Indiana, that is part of that hydrogen hub that Susan discussed at the beginning of this webinar, is on a whole new scale of itself. It's a whole order of magnitude larger than many of these other projects. They're planning on storing 23 million tons per year. We suspect it could be even higher than that once that project takes off. Let's now look at a few of these projects in a little bit more detail. So let's start with kind of the most advanced projects that are coming to fruition. It's important to note that the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency has created a special permit process that operators who would like to sequester carbon dioxide underground for long-term sequestration, they have to get this permit in order to do so. It's Class 6 permit is what it's called. Only 3 projects in the state of Indiana have so far applied for a Class 6 permit with the EPA. The farthest along the process is the Wabash Valley Resources Project out in Vigo and Vermilion counties that Kerwin made reference to. They're the ones that have their own special legislation. That project has already received a draft permit from the EPA that happened in the middle of last year. And we anticipate that we could see a final permit being issued as early as the first quarter of next year. So that project is by far the most advanced project in terms of actually coming to fruition. But there are 2 ethanol projects that have also filed Class 6 permits with the EPA. Those are both ethanol production plants that are owned by Valero and Cardinal Ethanol. They have submitted applications, but the EPA has not yet issued draft permits for those. No other projects so far in Indiana have submitted Class 6 permits, but we are expecting more to come in the near future. So if you don't see a project in your neighborhood yet, watch out. There could be one coming soon. As Susan mentioned, Indiana was selected by the Department of Energy for a hydrogen hub award, and BP in Northwest Indiana is leading that hydrogen hub in Indiana. They are proposing to make hydrogen at their Whiting refinery, a super polluter located on Lake Michigan. But they want to take that carbon dioxide that's generated from making hydrogen with fossil fuels and pipe it across Northwest Indiana. They're looking at least 6 counties right now as potential storage sites for that carbon to be sequestered. The Department of Energy has awarded them a $98 million award to help them start doing test wells in order to characterize the geology in those locations so that they can then file Class 6 permits in the locations that are the most promising. I also have on the slide here kind of an example that kind of helps illustrate just how powerful the 45Q tax credit incentive that Kerwin discussed is. It's really hard to conceptualize what an $85 a ton incentive means. And when you throw around millions of tons of carbon dioxide, it kind of sounds abstract. So for the BP project, let's look at specifically what this would mean. They're proposing to sequester 23 million tons of carbon dioxide a year. And if you assume 12 years of operation at $85 per ton, that would get BP $23.5 billion in federal subsidies just through that 45Q tax credit. So we're talking very, very big money, very huge incentives that kind of dwarf any comparable incentives that have existed for other kind of energy industries in the past. So even though this technology is very expensive and unproven, this very large tax credit is motivating a lot of companies to pursue this technology. Let's look at some other projects too. Down in southern Indiana, we have 2 companies, Duke Energy and Heidelberg Materials, which the Department of Energy has awarded money for them to do studies at their plants, their existing plants, to determine whether or not CCS technology would work there, and what kind of equipment would be necessary, what are the operating costs, that kind of thing. That's called a front-end engineering design study, a FEED study. So both of these companies are going to be undertaking these studies in the coming year or 2. And that's going to then kind of determine for them what the next step is. Are they going to pursue CCS at those locations, or are they not? The Duke Energy project is at their Edwardsport coal gasification power plant. That's a boondoggle power plant that has generated really uneconomic, really expensive electricity since day one, since it first came online. And it has never been economic to operate. So adding really expensive carbon capture and sequestration technology would only exacerbate that existing challenge there. So that project in particular does not make a lot of sense, yet they're pushing forward with this study Heidelberg Materials is a cement manufacturer. They have plants in a number of places across the country. At this Indiana cement manufacturing plant, they're looking at sequestering the carbon dioxide from making cement on site. And then let's turn to one more example. Northwest Indiana is maybe famous internationally for being the home of a lot of steel making. We make more than a quarter of the nation's primary steel in Northwest Indiana at 3 large integrated steel mills. Cleveland Cliffs owns 2 of those large steel mills, the Indiana Harbor and the Burns Harbor facilities. CCS is coming into play in their consideration of reducing their carbon emissions at both of these facilities. And unfortunately, the pursuit of carbon capture and sequestration is distracting them from making the investments they need to actually pursue sustainable, clean steel. So first, let's look at Indiana Harbor. That facility is located not very far away from that BP Whiting facility that is going to be making hydrogen under that hydrogen hub that Susan talked about, the Mach H2 hub. So Cleveland Cliffs has already started to construct a pipeline from their Indiana Harbor facility in the direction of the BP Whiting facility to get hydrogen that they can inject in their blast furnace. Now, this could theoretically reduce emissions a little bit at their steel mill, but this technology has no viable pathway to actually reducing emissions to the significant extent we're going to need to address climate change. To do that, we would need new technologies that would not be a blast furnace and the basic oxygen furnace that these facilities have. And the Citizens Action Coalition has issued a report earlier this year for those who are interested in learning more about those potential pathways to decarbonizing our steelmaking and our sustainable metals manufacturing in Indiana report. So I'd invite you to look there if you're interested in learning more about that. At Burns Harbor, Cleveland Cliffs is exploring the opportunity of CCS at that facility. They've applied to the DOE for funding so they can do their own feed study at that facility. To my knowledge, that award has not been made yet, so that is still up in the air. And with that, let me turn it over to GARD. Thank you.
Hello. Hi, my name is Carolyn McCready, and I'm a member of GARD. I'm its secretary and a founding member. We started out as a group, as an ad hoc group, you can see from the pictures, because an outfit by the name of Fulcrum came into town promising the world. They were greenwashing everything, saying how they were going to take garbage and turn it into synthetic fuel. And it was just going to be wonderful. And they were going to create jobs and revenue for the city. And basically they, they pressured the city council into signing an agreement very early on. And so because we didn't have a frontline environmental group operating here, we were basically working as an ad hoc group at the beginning. And so we got busy immediately. We researched the technology, we researched the company, we went to public meetings, we challenged them publicly. We even tried to stop the vote at the city council by Doreen put pillows on all of their chairs at the city council, asking them to sleep on the decision to go with Fulcrum, because we knew that it wasn't a good idea from the research that we had done. Unfortunately, the city had not vetted Fulcrum in the way that we had. So anyway, that didn't work. So now we're stuck with it. But the main thing that happened was that they needed money, and they got it from the state of Indiana, $150 million in tax exempt bonds, which is what they were promised in 2 installments, which would help them to fund the operation, which they call Centerpoint Fulcrum. So in the meantime, they pursued their air permit, and we organized a hearing at which about 99% of the people who were there spoke against it, including our state delegation and other civil rights groups who were there, including the NAACP. And, so we thought that, well, we assumed that the pressure that we were putting on was going to have some impact, but it actually hasn't. And I think I've just lost myself here. But in any case, we have been very, very busy dealing with them. We challenged their air permit in the court, the OEA, and in the court that accepts challenges on air permits that IDEM has given. And we realized that we were going to need to have a legal counsel because we couldn't fight them on our own. So in any case, we were able to find an ally in the Environmental Law and Policy Group out of Chicago, and they have represented us. We are still in court on that challenge to Fulcrum's air permit. In the meantime, we've also been challenging other outfits that want to come in and do this, basically the same thing, but in another part of the city. So we have been very, very active on all of these fronts, and which has caused us to understand that we need to absolutely need to have a permanent, sustainable organization that will not only challenge these greenwashing companies, these polluters, challenge the existing pollution along the lakefront, but also be able to present to people an educational program about the harmful effects of pollution and also the alternative, which is, of course, sustainable development. So our goal then overall is to make GUARD a permanent fixture in Gary. And I would say that we absolutely look forward to collaborating with others on issues of environmental justice.
Hello, everyone. My name is Daniela. I serve as the digital organizer for Just Transition Northwest Indiana. And I'm here to tell you the next steps and our call to action, because today you are able to take direct action on how to influence this. Let's remember that we are building and we're organizing towards a just transition, and this is a just transition to a regenerative economy powered by renewable energy. Hydrogen and carbon capture are not a part of this transition, and today you can help us make this a reality. I will be dropping some of the links here, but our call to actions are two really main ones, which include sign our Just Transition Northwest Indiana's petition to tell Midwest decision makers to stop the hydrogen hub rush. What I really like of this petition is that it directly emails, as you sign it and you fill it in the information, it directly emails Midwest decision makers. You also have a second take action to take, and is to sign CAC's petition to tell Indiana lawmakers to reject carbon captures and CO2 dumps. You can scan, if you have your phones by you, you can scan these QR codes and that would take you to our petitions, but I will also be dropping those on our webinar chat right now. As well as we please encourage you to follow us on social media. This, as you know, is a developing issue. So as we are organizing, we're going to have more call to actions. So please do follow us on all social medias. I will also be dropping the links for that. But you have Just Transition NWI, you have CAC Indiana, and then you have Gary Advocates on Facebook. So please make sure to follow us. It would be really helpful, and to interact with these actions. I will continue now as we are moving into Q&A.
So I'm going to jump in quickly, Daniela, just to sort of bring us back to center. This is actually the second webinar that we have attended with GUARD. They hosted one with folks from Illinois perhaps a month ago that was excellent. And I think the what they illustrate so beautifully is how a community can come together and stand up in these David and Goliath situations and pause, put a pause in the process until things have more clarity and more truth comes to light. And we're very grateful for those efforts. And we hope that others will be inspired by this as well, not to just take this. So I think that is that's an important point for everyone to keep in mind. You might just be one person, but you know, it sounds corny, but one person can make a difference, and our efforts together are exponential. So please keep that in mind, and I hope you will sign our petitions and get more involved in this process. So I believe we're moving to Q&A now. Is that correct?
That is correct. LeBray, take it away.
Hi, everyone. I am LeBray. I am the regional organizer for Just Transition Northwest Indiana. Please feel free to put your questions in the Q&A. And so now we actually have one comment from Leslie. So Leslie, and I'm going to give this to you, Kerwin. So Leslie says that she just learned that the Indiana Department of Environmental Management project intake form for Indiana CAP includes CCS. So would you like to talk to that, Kerwin?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I guess maybe they should, if that's the case, rename it the Climate Inaction Plan, perhaps. I think everybody that would. I think it's imperative that folks comment to IDEM on that action plan, and specifically with respect to including CCS is, as we know, a full solution. And what IDEM really needs to focus on is providing resources, providing tools to local communities to address the challenges related to climate at the local level within these communities, whether it's transportation, building electrification, public spaces, agriculture, farming, those type of issues. Let's give the money to the communities, to the locals that know what to do with it, know how to improve quality of life, and not to the big polluters so that they can continue polluting. But I think it would be important to address the IDEM that in no way, shape, or form should a state climate plan coming from IDEM especially revolve around CCS. It should revolve around local solutions at the community level that lift people up and improve people's quality of life.
Thank you. Thank you, Kerwin. Would anyone else like to comment on that?
I'm going to dovetail off of that, specifically on the issue of environmental justice. A lot of these pipelines and projects are going into historically dumped on communities. Whiting, Gary, we've seen this time and time again, and it is being gift wrapped essentially as part of the Justice 40 initiative, where part of this plan is 40% of economic benefit should go to minority communities. This is another smokescreen. The environmental justice communities are unanimously opposed to this. The White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council, which was appointed by the president, different groups, BIPOC and indigenous groups from across the United States came together and created a committee to specifically look at carbon management. It's the Carbon Management Working Group. And unanimously, they rejected this as a solution to environmental justice communities across the United States. And their quote was, "We will not be the canaries in the coal mine anymore." So this is, universally, this is not a gift. This is not a present to environmental justice communities. There are green solutions that should be investigated. They're not ready yet. Green hydrogen is one. If that could be perfected, if that could be made less expensive and less water intensive, and it looks like there's huge potential for that. It's a little premature, but it looks like that could be the ticket. That should be what's investigated. That is what we should be researching, not these other fantasies that are proven they're just fallacy. So, Libre, back to you.
Great, thank you. Thank you. Another question with Megan. So Megan is based out of, and this is to the group. So Megan is based out of Indy and has just recently moved to Indy from Portland, Oregon, and wants to know who should she be plugging in with locally on this issue.
Well, I would say Citizens Action Coalition is a great organization you should look up. To toot our own horn a little bit, we invite you to sign up for our newsletter, make sure you're getting communications from us. And we have a lot of great information on our website about issues not only in Indianapolis, but across the whole state of Indiana. So we are an Indiana-based advocacy organization. We have a great website on CCS that covers a lot of the issues with the technology. I would say that's a great place to start to keep in touch and to keep apprised of what's happening. Kerwin's down at the General Assembly during the legislative session, so we have really detailed legislative updates. I work a lot at the Indiana Utility Regulatory Commission, so we're following electricity and power policy a lot. And then my colleagues are also working a lot on CCS projects across the state, working with local communities that are looking for help and are trying to oppose these projects. So that's a little bit of bragging. There's a lot of other great organizations across the state. Some of them are on the call right now with us, focused on Northwest Indiana. So particularly if you're in Northwest Indiana, make sure you look up GUARD, make sure you look up Just Transition Northwest Indiana. And if you don't have an organization directly in your neighborhood, I think GUARD is a great example of how you can get together with your community members to form your own group. So don't feel constrained to only joining existing organizations. This is really an opportunity to unite communities together. And those can often be really powerful voices that are a really important part of the conversation. So I would invite you to also consider how you can work with other like-minded individuals and get active in that way as well. I think you're on mute, Libre.
Yeah, I was on mute. Zoom issues, hashtag Zoom problems. Thank you, Ben. So I have another one from an anonymous attendee. So this one here, but what support are you planning on for the local level? The petitions are great, but what about the local level?
I'll jump in there. We couldn't address this in the amount of time presented. This issue is such an octopus with more than 8 arms. And in order for these sites to get their permit granted and to get their funding, one of the requirements they must meet is to have a community benefits plan, and they must solicit input from the community. Now, we have been extremely underwhelmed by what BP presented in their first attempt. It was very little question, more of a presentation of like the happy pictures that we saw. They didn't have Taylor Swift, we did. And they said at the beginning of the rollout, they told us all, sign up, get your name in so that you can be part of this, selection process for community groups. So we very quickly signed up, and then they backpedaled and they said, no, we're not doing that yet. And they had sort of a shift in who was in charge of that area. And so again, this transparency issue, we're really not sure what is going on. However, we do feel like that is an area where there could be room for some pushback. So if you're part of a community group, I would, pay attention, we will post, but when they say it's time to put your name in the hat for that, I suggest community groups get involved in that arena and see what kind of feedback they want. We're concerned that we don't want the usual industry cheerleaders to take up those seats. We want the workers in the communities and the frontline communities to be there. Jenny, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I wanted to kind of expand too. And hello, everyone. I'm Jenny. I'm a member and founder of GUARD, Gary Advocates. To build on Susan's point, what I am coming to realize, and part of why GARD is coming into this issue, even though US Steel has not specifically thrown their hat in the ring yet on these issues, is that these pipelines and the sequestration and the hydrogen hubs, they're so big and they're going to impact many, many communities. It's very hard to have this be a super like hyper local issue, because the way that my understanding of how these are designed is, the pipeline will run through multiple towns. So we really need to kind of come together regionally and on a state level to really try to understand and address these issues. And I think there is some hope in that we see some of this was defeated recently in Illinois. The carbon sequestration wells and pipelines that were looking to go in there, I think this was maybe end of October, early November, that that company withdrew because there was so much citizen pushback. And so I think, we're hoping to kind of create that same sort of momentum that we saw in Illinois. I get that they have a totally different state government, and where we're at in terms of regulations may look really different. I'm actually hoping CAC can maybe say more if you guys are aware of how different our regulatory framework is currently in Indiana versus where Illinois is at on these issues. But I just wanted to also connect people to that win and to this idea of coming together beyond just focusing maybe on Gary or your specific town. This really is a statewide issue.
Yes, great point. Great point. Thank you for that. So this question, I'm going to pose to GARD, and hopefully you all, know the answer to this one. So this comes to from Paul. Paul says, with the election of a new mayor in Gary, will Volcrum and others continue to get help from the mayor? And I don't know is an answer.
We know that the new mayor has expressed opposition to the Fulcrum project, and we're very much looking forward to working with the new administration to encourage Fulcrum, push Fulcrum to
Leave.
yeah, to that their project is not in a good location. It's an environmental justice community. It's right on the shoreline of Lake Michigan. It should be protected into perpetuity for all the people who utilize the drinking water from Lake Michigan and the animals in our ecosystem. And of course, we're concerned about the residents of Gary who are most impacted. But Fulcrum itself seems to have potentially shot itself in the foot because it has defaulted on the bonds that it received from Nevada in order to build their facility. So those are some things that may very much affect their ability to construct their $500 million plant here in Gary with bonds that have been provided by the state of Indiana.
I have another question for GARD. Just living in between Michigan City and Gary, and we see constantly BP, they don't follow the law, they have an accident, or we don't know what you're talking about. We look at the air reports for Cleveland Cliffs, all the water violations and the NIPD's permit request. The industry consistently does not follow the rules, and IDEM consistently does not hold them to task, and are often late to respond when an emergency happens. Case in point, 3 years ago when the Cleveland Cliffs ammonia spill happened, then it was ArcelorMittal. I'm very, very concerned about that. What are you folks in GARD, what are your thoughts on faith in the existing institutions?
I think you would say they clearly have to do better. I mean, first of all, they have to meet the obligations of their existing permits, which they're not doing in many cases. And then they need to have they need to do better for the communities that they exist in. They need to have a relationship as members of the community, and community members need to have an ability to impact the decisions that these companies are making about the way they spend their money and the way they run their plants. So I would just say that one of the things that we hope to do, and I want to give a shout out to Save the Dunes, because they are working, trying to develop pollution prevention roundtable to address the issues that have caused these spills and these accidents, so-called accidents, that the companies are having, in order to get them to take the initiative to do better themselves and to respond to community concerns. So I think that's one way that we can try and get industries to do a better job, is to form a direct relationship with them. That's not the only answer, but they need to know who we are, where we are, and they need to see us and hear what we have to say, and become better community members.
Thanks, Doreen. LeBray, oh, go ahead, Carolyn.
I'd also like to say that they have not been made accountable, and I can only speak for Gary, but many, the past 5 administrations have kind of, had a hands-off attitude toward the polluters on the lakefront, and there have been no eyes on them, and there have been no comments about all of their violations, what they do. It doesn't make any difference, and it's just like the lakefront is sacred territory, and you can't do or say anything to them because that's jobs and that's revenue, and that's how they get over jobs and revenue. That's what Fulcrum came here promising, and the environmental part, just went away until GARD got busy and started pointing out to people what the impact would be. But I think that eyes on them, having governmental eyes on them, having the community's eyes on them, and then stepping up consistently to challenge, what IDEM is doing, not just the company, but IDEM, because IDEM is complicit in what the company gets away with.
Yeah. And you said that a word that we have not really delved into, because that's a whole nother arm to this octopus, which is jobs and the economy. And I'm wondering if Kerwin or Ben could step in and talk about the importance of sustainable steel and the report that you worked on. The transition, if we don't take care of it in Indiana, it's going to go elsewhere in the world. So we need to keep those jobs here, those union jobs here. Kerwin or Ben, could you touch on that, please?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So this is a really critical subject because steel is a big climate polluter in the state of Indiana. The Gary Works facility is the single largest climate polluter in the state of Indiana. And the 2 Cleveland Cliffs facilities that I mentioned earlier tonight are the number 4 and number 5 largest climate polluters in the state of Indiana. So cleaning up steel is really critical for us with respect to addressing the climate crisis. Those facilities in Indiana, those primary steel mills in Northwest Indiana, all use the basic oxygen furnaces and blast furnaces as part of that steel making process. And those are super polluting. To get to clean or sustainable steel, that would take a different technology that we could implement here in Indiana. It would, instead of using dirty blue hydrogen based on fossil fuels, it would use green hydrogen, in other words, hydrogen made from renewable energy, as a fuel source. And instead of using the blast furnace and basic oxygen furnace process, it would instead use a process called direct reduced iron and electric arc furnaces. So these technologies do exist. We haven't seen it applied yet in the United States in terms of a sustainable steel manufacturing facility yet, but there's a tremendous amount of interest in addressing the pollution from steel because right now it is disproportionately harming communities of color, low-income communities, communities that often have a disproportionate amount of other industrial facilities and pollution already. So this is a major issue, not just when it comes to the climate crisis, but also when we talk about things like more traditional air and water pollution, things that, not only make our air quality bad, but also things like toxic metals that can come from these facilities that lead to lead poisoning or lead to arsenic dumping in our rivers and waterways and other really nasty stuff. So the long story short is we do have those technologies available. The federal government is issuing unprecedented amounts of incentives and subsidies to help these manufacturing facilities clean up their act, if you will. If these facilities go ahead and ask for the money, if they apply for it, and if they take that initiative to actually push hard for true sustainable steel. And so that's really critical if we want to keep this tremendous economic driver in Indiana in Indiana. A lot of other industries in Indiana, a very manufacturing heavy state, depend on access to steel. Things like automobile manufacturing. We have a number of automobile manufacturing plants across the state of Indiana. That's just one example.
Thank you. So we have time for one more question. And if we did not get to your question live, we will be answering these questions and responding to you personally. So for the last question, and this actually goes to Kerwood or Ben, can you talk a little bit about the citizen action that is happening in Vigo and Vermilion counties?
Sure. Yeah. Well, as we talked about, Wabash Valley Resources is proposing the construction of their facility at the old coal gasification site owned by Duke in West Terre Haute. They are planning 2 injection wells, one in Vigo and one in Vermilion County. And that has created quite the outcry in the local community, as that community, many of them, if not most of them, didn't learn about these plans until EPA dropped a letter in the mail. And they heard notice about the public meeting for the EPA hearing. So first and foremost, a total lack of transparency and discussion with the community played into increasing sort of the public outrage, if you will. But what we have is a group that CAC is working closely with, especially my colleague and friend Bryce, CAC's organizer, who is frequently out there in Vigo and Vermilion County helping that community out. But there is a large and dedicated group of folks in, oh boy, New Harmony and Universal and West Terre Haute and Clinton, that whole area that is meeting on a regular basis to discuss strategy, that is working on getting signage out there, whether it's yard signs, whether it's larger signage along highways and heavily traveled roads. They are going to regular attendees at county commissioner meetings, county council meetings, talking with mayors, talking with elected officials. They've met with their state senator. They've met with Senator Braun's office. They're working with local bodies of government to pass resolutions, pass ordinances, opposing this stuff, prohibiting this stuff, whatever they can do. But they are very, very concerned about their community, the health and safety and the long-term sustainability of their community. And they're pushing back and they're fighting back in any way that they can. And CAC is doing all we can to support them with our efforts, not only at the State House, but also at IDEM and EPA, and helping with comments and connecting them with national folks that have an interest in supporting them and lifting them up as well. So incredibly inspirational to be working with the community out there that is so impassioned about protecting their community from this looming threat of massive CO2 landfills in their community that only stands to threaten their quality of life, threaten their water. And they're trying to work very, very hard. So CAC is proud to be working with those folks out there who are very, very committed.
All right. Well, we are 2 minutes away from time, so I'm going to move to wrap us up. Again, if you had questions, we will get back to you if they were not answered live. And I do have to do a definite shout out to our partners at Climate Justice Alliance. We're a proud member, and they lead the fight against false solutions from here in the US to globally. And next year, we will be knocking on doors to present these issues. So stay tuned, come join us. So much more to come in the coming year. I cannot thank you all enough for taking time out of your busy lives to join us to learn about this. This is a daunting topic, so much to cover. I encourage you to continue to, now that you have like a base layer, continue to build on this, continue to read the papers, read the notices, what is happening, talk to your neighbors, talk to your families. and follow this to see what you can do next to be involved. And so much thanks to our wonderful panelists, the folks at GUARD. We are thrilled that you joined us this evening, and CAC, your entire crew. Always a pleasure to work with you and collaborate. Daniela, Libre, Ashley, everyone else on this call, Carolyn, Jenny, Doreen, Ben, Kerwin, Libre. Thank you, and have a wonderful evening, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.